Children growing up in a chaotic environment where there is excessive emotional pain can deal with pain in several ways. This is really kind of interesting because they can either handle it the way it's supposed to be. Now imagine we're dealing with millions and millions of children. Some of them, they face it and they handle it. Sometimes you'll see a family of 5 or 6 kids and 4 of them are screwed up and one of them just takes off and does things the right way. You know, why didn't all of them do that? Well, one of them, their coping skills were just a little bit better. Maybe they were the oldest child in the family. Maybe they were the youngest, watching all of these, watching all their siblings screw up. But sometimes they do. They handle it really, really well. Sometimes, like in the case of Denzel Washington was headed for jail. When he was just a little tiny guy, I mean, he was only 10 or 11 years old, and he was headed for jail. He was a juvenile delinquent. He did all kinds of horrible things. He was in a gang. This is in Philadelphia. And then he went to the Boys and Girls Club, and he developed a love of sports. And from that, he was able to become Denzel Washington, the actor. So sometimes you can find somebody to help you deal with it, whether it's a relative. In his case, it was the lady at the Boys and Girls Club. And because of that, Denzel Washington has become a spokesman for the Girls and Boys Club, the Boys and Girls Club. He has also contributed millions and millions of dollars to the Boys and Girls Club. They can accept what happened, and of course this is another positive thing that can happen. They can just accept it. They can accept the fact that they were raped by their uncle or by a boyfriend of mom's or whatever. They can just accept it and go on with their lives. These are the positive things that can happen to you. But there are a lot of negative things that can happen, and this is normally what does happen. Because they have been attacked by somebody that's supposed to help them, a lot of times there are negative consequences. They have an immature mind, and so they don't understand what's going on. So they just get away. They run away from home. And they become chronic runaways. This becomes a habit for them. So anytime they get into a stressful situation, they leave. My second wife was this way. Every time she had a problem with her husband or with her life, she just left. And she'd leave everything. She took nothing with her. It was really kind of strange. I was her, she was mine, and I was her. Okay. Anyway, so when she left me, she was also a drinker. But when she left me, the reason she left me was because she couldn't handle not drinking is what she couldn't handle. It didn't have anything to do with me, didn't have anything to do with the kids. It had to do with the fact that she couldn't handle it. So what did she do? She was in the military, so she got an assignment. I didn't even know about it. She was gone. She just left. She went to Beale Air Force Base. She got an assignment.
PCS and
PCS out, yeah, she just left. Oh, you think that's funny? That's not funny. No, I know, I didn't have a clue that she was leaving. All of a sudden, like she just kind of disappeared. And she was still on base. She was processing out was what she was doing. And then she was gone. And she only came back once after that. She flew into, we were stationed down in Lubbock, Texas, Reese Air Force Base. And she flew into Enid, Oklahoma, and we went out. It's a MAC base, so we went and picked her up. That's that last time I was ever with her. I mean, she just flew in, and of course she apologized and everything, but she just ran away. She just left, and that's the way she handled things, by leaving. That was her modus operandi, was to run away. They become hyperactive. Wait a minute, so they become hyperactive. Do they look like they have ADHD? Can we treat them with Ritalin and take care of them? No, not with these guys, because they don't have ADHD. They just become hyperactive. and there's nothing you can do to treat it. And so if you try to treat it with amphetamines, it doesn't work. But they become hyperactive, they can become angry and fight, so now they have anger issues. All of a sudden they have anger issues, what are we going to do with them? Richard Pryor, when he went to jail for smoking dope. When I say dope, I'm talking about this was cocaine. He would smoke the cocaine. I can't think of what the word for it is. Anyway, he went to jail. He went to jail for about a year and a half. And he said everybody wanted to be my boyfriend in jail, and the way he kept people away from him was by joking with them. He's a funny guy. He's a comedian. So that is, in essence, is the way he handled life, was by telling jokes. That way he dissipated all the ugliness. So a lot of comedians are actually children who have lived a chaotic life, and they use humor to dissipate that situation. They can develop an addictive use, and this is a very common way of dealing with things. A lot of times they do this because their parents are addicts, so they learn it from their parents. They can turn to drugs, they can overeat, they can gamble, or they can start having sex with anybody that comes along. If the stress continues over time, the counterbalancing behavior will become ingrained in the brain and becomes part of the individual's personality. So this isn't something that just happens to them in childhood. It follows them for the rest of their life, like my second wife. She was a drinker, and she was a runaway. She just constantly ran away. She claimed that she wanted to have children, and that was her big problem, was the fact that nobody could get her pregnant. Well, the reality was she couldn't get pregnant because she had a problem. She had a reproductive problem. But, and I assume that she has stayed with her children. The last time I talked to her kids, she had a set of twins, and they were 2.5 years old. So I'm assuming that she has stopped the whole runaway thing. That's where she was going. She was running to her children. In the future, when an unwanted emotion arises, they will be drawn to the simplest solution, the counterbalancing behavior. She was having trouble at work. That's why she started drinking again. And once she started drinking, then I didn't make any sense anymore. She was using me not to drink. I didn't know she was an alcoholic. I didn't know it. She had never ever had alcohol around me except one time when we had a drinking contest. And I won, strangely enough. Yeah,
I can't imagine you drinking.
Yeah, well, I'm not.
Maybe water.
I think I had three beers or something, and I won. And she's acting all drunk like a crazy woman. And for 2 beers, her nickname was the Jack Daniels Kid. So she's drinking corn whiskey. Yeah, like 2 beers is going to touch anything as far as that's concerned. Anyway, she was faking it.
Was it German?
I'm sorry?
German beer might do that.
No, it was Budweiser, I think, if I'm not mistaken. No, it was Budweiser. Yeah, she was faking it. The people most likely to abuse drugs, stress is common in the home, abuse of some kind occurs in the home, drugs or drinking are commonly used in the home or among the individual's peers. Healthy ways of reacting to stress and or anger aren't learned, and that's what we were talking about. How do you handle the stress in your family life? Society tells the individual that psychoactive substances are normal and an acceptable way to solve life's problems. Scott was talking about his neighborhood where he grew up in San Diego. 2 methadone clinics. You can imagine that psychoactive substances were acceptable, were something that were acceptable in that area. Living in a community where access to legal and illegal drugs are easy, and of course, if you've got 2 methadone clinics in the area, then you would imagine that there's a lot of drugs in the area. There are pre-existing mental conditions exacerbated by negative home environment. Healthy brain chemistry can't be maintained because of poor nutrition. If your parents are, especially if they're meth heads, a lot of times they don't care whether you have food or not. The thing that they care about is whether they have meth or not. The media inundates the individual with advertisements supporting the use of select psychoactive substances. This doesn't happen as much now as it used to happen. We used to have tobacco commercials. We used to have a lot of beer and whiskey commercials and tequila commercials. Of course, who's the lady that is on the whiskey commercials? Mila Kunis. What does she have to do with whiskey? Ashton Kutcher's main squeeze now, I guess. I think they're married and they've got a couple kids.
It's attractive. It's a freaking media stunt.
There you go. So yeah, I guess if I drink whiskey, then maybe Mila Kunis will come out of one of the barrels or something. Or I'll imagine that she comes out of the barrel. One belongs to a peer group where excessive use of psychoactive substances is normal. A lot of gangs are based on alcohol usage or drug usage. Or the Hells Angels, of course, they sell drugs. That's their main means of acquiring money. Heredity and the environment may prime an individual for addictive behavior, but it is a psychoactive substance that they decide to use that will determine the impact the addiction will have on their life. Excessive drug use will not only make the individual more susceptible to more and more use, but more vulnerable to other stronger drugs. And of course, this is one of the reasons why we are deathly afraid, well, some of us are deathly afraid, of legalizing marijuana. Once we legalize marijuana, that's a high that you can get without having to worry about it. So now are we going to seek the next high? Is it crystal meth? Is it heroin? What is it? Where are we going after this? I know, let's create a new drug that is 1,000 times stronger than morphine. That'll work. No, it's so stupid. Psychoactive drugs, select psychoactive substances, particularly methamphetamine, cause the death of brain cells through a process known as apoptosis, where the damaged cells are programmed to kill themselves. So they do. They are hyperstimulated, and since they're hyperstimulated, they're non-functional anymore, and they destroy themselves. And this is one of the reasons that people get meth head. Meth head is, you've got all these dead brain cells in there, whoops, and now you're not as smart as you used to be. And it's going to take you 18 months to recover. Nicotine produces an immediate and long-term change in the level of dopamine and norepinephrine, which leads to a faster development of tolerance and dependence. Nicotine is the most addictive substance known to man right now. Some drugs have a greater power to positively reinforce, and therefore they compel to a continued use. Cocaine and heroin are this way. Once you start using cocaine, you desire to use it over and over and over again. Heroin is the same way. Once upon a time, I was watching a video the other day, and this lady was so slender. She was so slender, and I was thinking, God, what the hell? I mean, is she really that skinny? She looks like she just came out of a Nazi concentration camp.
Yeah.
Oh, it was horrible. And then I realized, oh my God, this is a song from the late 70s, early 80s, when heroin chic was everybody was trying to look as skinny as possible. And that's when you had to have the sunken cheeks and everything. Women were having their molars pulled out so that their cheeks would sink in.
Was that the case with Karen Carpenter? Or was she
Karen Carpenter, she was just anorexic.
It was all up there.
Yeah, it was all up in her brain. No, that heroin chic was Cheryl Tiggs and Kate Moss. I'm trying to think of somebody else. Oh, just ugly stuff. I mean, there was a guy that on the a Brazilian fashion model, and he died on the runway because he hadn't eaten and you know, he was taking drugs to be as slender as possible. And he died on the runway. I mean, we've never seen anything like this before. Heroin chic, as stupid as that sounds. Compulsive obsessive behavior mimics drug use, which in turn causes the brain to be rewired. If you gamble and you gamble excessively, your brain has been rewired. Your brain has been rewired as much as if you were a meth head. People who overeat, same situation. People who are shopaholics. People who have sex addictions. People who have video game addictions. These individuals, their brain has been rewired just as if they were taking drugs. Internet use, of course. Some individuals can't stand to be more than a couple minutes away from their telephone or their computers because they think that somebody wants to talk to them. I've got my phone today. I brought my phone. I didn't forget it. I normally do. But, I mean, who wants to talk to me? Do I have to worry about what my wife wants? I talked to her last night. I know what she's doing today. She probably doesn't need to communicate with me. I don't need to stay in constant communication with her. Do I? Should I? Who the hell would want to talk to me? My students? Forget it. No, no. No, I'm not going to answer all your questions for you. Research with video game usage has shown that dopamine is released in the reward reinforcement pathway when an individual plays video games an amount equivalent to methamphetamine usage, so they become just as addicted to video games as they do to methamphetamines. PET scans of compulsive eaters has demonstrated that there is a decreased number of dopamine receptor sites in the nucleus accumbens. These are the D2 sites that have to do with desire. Research shows that between 25 to 63% of compulsive gamblers have been dependent on alcohol or other drugs in their lives, and they are using gambling to replace the other addiction. It has been demonstrated that gambling creates brain disruption similar to drug or alcohol usage. We've seen this in PET scans, we've seen this in functional MRIs. They have exactly the same problems that drug addicts have. Now we're going to talk about the most addictive substances in the world. And of course the most addictive substance, the one that is the hardest and the quickest into addiction is tobacco or nicotine from the tobacco. Smoke one time, first time you smoke it, you get sick, second time you smoke, now all of a sudden you're hooked. And you feel like you need to smoke again. And this is one of the reasons, especially with an adolescent mind.
I like cigars once in a while.
I'm sorry?
But you're not supposed to inhale cigars.
Oh, right, yeah. Well, it's too harsh. You can't pull it down into your lungs. And that's one of the reasons why cigarettes were so destructive. When people smoked pipes and cigars, the tobacco was way too harsh for them to pull it down into their lungs, so they didn't get the same buzz that everybody else did. Well, when they invented cigarettes, of course it's a milder blend for one thing, and it's a much smaller structure, so people were able to pull it down into their lungs and blow it out their nose. If you watch old movies, you see this. People will be smoking cigarettes and they'll pull it down into their lungs and they'll hold it there for a couple seconds and then they'll blow it out their nose. You don't see that. I mean, you really don't see that if you're wandering around watching people smoke cigarettes. But in the old days, that's the way they did it. And of course, it made them very addicted. The second hardest and quickest into addiction is smoking crack cocaine. So the most addictive substance known to man is tobacco, nicotine in tobacco, and the second is crack cocaine. Gets into your system very quickly. Of course, you bring it down into your lungs again, and because you bring it into the lungs, then it is covering more area, and because of that, it gets into your system very, very rapidly. The third quickest and hardest into addiction is smoking or injecting heroin. The fourth is injecting methamphetamines. The fifth is snorting cocaine. Once again, we're dealing with very hard drugs here. Snorting cocaine. The sixth is ingesting opioid painkillers. As we know from what's happening around the world, if you watch the President's State of the Union address, he talked about this, about opioids, about how we're curing opioid addiction. I was shocked to find out that we were, and then I found out what he's talking about was this month wasn't as bad as last month. That's what he's talking about. I know, but it still has increased like 22% over the last year. Oh God, he's such a liar. Well, he used his statistics to make it sound like he's doing something good. The 7th hardest and quickest into addiction is ingesting any amphetamine. Of course, I've known a lot of speed freaks in my time. I've buried a lot of speed freaks, checked them into the morgue. Somebody's got to do it. We'll let the white guy do it, right?
I've seen them.
We don't want the Navajos to be touching dead things. Yeah, let's get the white guy to do it. He'll do it. He's a nut. The 8th hardest and quickest into addiction is ingesting sedative hypnotics. The 9th is drinking alcohol. The 10th is smoking marijuana. It's a fairly addictive substance. The 11th is ingesting PCP. So PCP is not really that addictive, not nearly as addictive as other drugs, but at the same, of course, you have a really negative reaction to PCP.
I got a story about PCP, not for me personally, but you know the show Cops, right?
Right.
I was watching it with the homeboy man, at the time homeboy.
Sure.
His uncle was on it.
Oh.
And he was on Germ or PCP.
Oh, he's on Cops?
Yeah. And a dog went to go freaking attack him, and he just hit the freaking dog.
Oh my God.
That's assault on officer. The reason why we knew it was him, because he had EMF tattooed on his back. It's a gang called El Monte Flores. We saw him hop the fence.
Oh my God.
But then it took like 4 tasers to get him freaking down because he was so
is
jacked up on PCP.
Oh jeez.
But the dog was coming toward him, he just, bah, and the dog must have flew like 2 feet.
Oh, is that
So
right?
that right there's assault on officer,
Yeah.
plus evading and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
German Shepherd?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not an easy dog to knock out.
But when you're on that, you feel nothing.
Yeah.
Someone could shoot you and you just keep walking.
Yeah. You gotta kill him or you can't stop him.
Really, he had like, let's see, tasers have 2, right?
Right.
There was 6 of them in there.
Oh,
He was still freaking going.
Still functional.
Yeah.
12th hardest and quickest into addiction is ingesting caffeine. We got some coffee here. We got some juice over here.
Milk.
Milk. Oh, it's milk. Oh, wow.
Ooh,
Hardly
too
addictive.
hardcore now.
The 13th hardest and quickest into addiction is ingesting MDMA or ecstasy. 14th is LSD, of course, not very addictive at all. And the last is peyote. Peyote is not addictive, not really very addictive. 15th hardest and quickest into addiction, and that is
What is
peyote.
peyote? Is it from a plant?
Yeah, it's a seed from the top. It's a cactus plant, peyote cactus, of course. Mescaline. Okay, so now we'll start chapter 3. I'm not that far behind. Kinda. Chapter 3 is about uppers. We're going to talk about uppers. Stimulants. So we'll start out with stimulants. Then we'll move to sedatives. Then we'll move to alcohol, I think. 2008, 5.6 million Americans used cocaine or cocaine products. 1.4 million Americans used methamphetamine for non-medical purposes. This is in 2008. Of course, that's 12 years ago. This is probably not the same as it was. 83 million Americans used tobacco products in 2008, and of course, as you can see, even the little guys use it. I think that's perfect. We need to get them hooked as soon as we can so that they will continue to smoke a lot of tobacco. But then again, they'll die young. So 166 million Americans drank coffee last year. Most of the people drank it daily. Not to pick on coffee drinkers. Americans averaged 56 gallons of soft drinks per person in 2008. 56 gallons Most of them were caffeinated beverages. That's 598 12-ounce cans of Mountain Dew or 359 20-ounce bottles of Mountain Dew. Of course, that's a bottle a day. Almost. Almost a bottle a day. 2008, 200 million people use betel nut. They brew it and drink it like coffee, or they chew it. And as you can see, it turns your teeth a lovely hue of really dark red to the point of it turning black. Betel nuts. We saw this in Vietnam. It was, you know, some ladies walking along and you're thinking, oh, she's kind of warm, isn't she? A little toasty. And then she'd open her mouth and she'd give you that red tooth smile and you go, oh my God.
Did you try it?
I'm sorry?
Did you try betel?
Me? No.
No?
No. I'm dumb, but I'm not that dumb. I didn't try coca leaves in South America either. I know. I'm not cool at all. Not even this much.
Square.
I am square as square can be. In Southeast Asia, especially Thailand, the area is having a severe problem with a form of methamphetamine called yaba. Yaba.
Shoot, man, in Southeast San Diego.
Let's go to San Diego, we can get some yaba.
Because it comes straight from
Thailand?
border.
Yeah.
No, Mexico.
Oh, this stuff comes up from Mexico?
No, meth.
Oh, meth, that's true.
But San Bernardino, you got the 81s making it.
Yeah,
Texas, you got the Bandidos.
right.
LA, you got the Mongos. And in Orange County, you got like all these other never stopped.
Good stuff. Can't argue with that.
It's a money maker.
Hey, as long as they're making money, who cares? You know, money's more important than people anyway, isn't it? Yeah, well, we'll ask our president. In the area around the Horn of Africa, the majority of the male population and much of the female population chew khat. It's a mild stimulant. This is one of the reasons why it's really difficult to control the people there. The Somalis, of course, they chew khat. The Egyptians chew khat. We were someplace that we weren't supposed to be. We were at a rapid deployment force base in Egypt, and we weren't supposed to be there. But of course, the Egyptian Secret Service allowed us to be there. So here I am at a rapid deployment force base, and we were being supplied by the Egyptians. So they would drive trucks into the compound from time to time, but half of them were chewing this stuff, and they couldn't. And of course, it's desert, so you can go just about anywhere. It's hard pan. It's flat. There's no roads. There's kind of a track. You know, you can follow the track or you can get off the track. You're probably okay. And these guys are just driving all over the place. They're going like 100 miles an hour. They're coming toward the base, and we had no idea. We didn't know if they're going to slow down, if they're going to stop. So every time one of these supply trucks came in, you know, they would call an exercise, and we would have to watch them and try to get out of their way, because half the time they didn't stop. They just ran right through the camp, and you couldn't get in a tent. If you got in a tent, they might run right over you, so you just never knew. So these guys would be coming in, and we would be trying to contact them on the radio, and half the time they're not answering, so we don't know what's going on. We don't know if they're going to stop, if they're juiced up on this khat stuff, and half the time they just ran right through the camp. And of course, eventually they stopped, or or they stopped chewing this stuff. Sometimes they'd end up, 50, 60 miles down in the desert. So we had no idea. We, half the time, sometimes they stop, but half.
Basically just dope.
Well, yeah, it's a stimulant. So they're all juiced up, and there was no controlling them. There was just no way to control them. And of course, you'd try to contact them on the radio, and they had forgotten to turn the radio on, or they were listening to it and they thought it was something else, or their music was on so high that they couldn't hear. Anyway, So it was a real trick. While I was there, only one person got hurt by these stupid people, and it was an SP tried to stop the truck and got hit by it. He just hit him going, I don't know, 70 or 80 miles an hour. He just clipped him, but boy, I'll tell you what, he was a mess. It flipped him probably.
Was it a truck?
Yeah, the truck. Yeah, it was an Egyptian truck too, so it wasn't an American truck. If it had been an American truck, they would have known that it was coming, you know, that's not good. It had to be an Egyptian truck. It was a rapid deployment force base. I don't know, you guys probably went out to some.
I guess it would be called a COB.
Yeah, except this was a secret base. We weren't supposed to be in Egypt at the time. This was in 80.
Well, we had a HESCO basket, right?
Yeah.
We only had about 12 of those surrounding us. We had to get our supplies dropped.
Oh, okay.
And it was 7 of us vendors.
Right.
That was it.
Well, this had to do with Israeli-Arab conflict going on. They had just fought a war. The Egyptians were, of course, we were trying to protect the Israelis. The Egyptians weren't supposed to do that because they just fought a war against the Israelis. It was a mess. It was a real mess. But anyway, we're out there trying to.
I've never been to Egypt. I'd like to go. I want to go see the freaking pyramid.
Well, I didn't get to see the pyramids. They flew us out of a base, a secret Air Force base. It was supposed to be an Egyptian base, but it was ours. Anyway, we were there we were their medics. I don't know why the Air Force supplied medics for Army, Marines, and a secret force that eventually became Delta Force. 1.3 billion people worldwide smoke cigarettes, lots and lots of people, lots and lots of Asians. There are natural stimulants and synthetic stimulants. Cocaine comes from the coca shrub. Nicotine comes from the tobacco plant, of course. Cathinone comes from the cot bush. Ephedrine comes from the ephedra bush. Ericoline comes from betel nuts, and caffeine, of course, comes from coffee, the coffee plant. Synthesized stimulants, methamphetamines, diet pills, which are amphetamines, methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, and methacathinone are the synthetic stimulants. Stimulants increase the activity in the central nervous system. It boosts energy, it raises heart rate and blood pressure. It increases respiration, reduces appetite, and it subdues your thirst. They may make the user more alert, which is what they're after, more active, which is also what they're after. Confidence, it actually makes you feel more confident, and the reason is because it increases your norepinephrine level. But it also makes you anxious, it makes you restless, and sometimes it makes you overly aggressive. Lots of situations with people on methamphetamine who kill somebody. They'll beat them to death. They usually, when they do that, they don't just kill them, they beat them to a pulp. There was a case in Helena, Montana, where a guy was on meth. For some reason, he's walking along and somebody had thrown away a baseball bat. He picked up the baseball bat, he's walking along. This guy came out to put his garbage out by the curb so it could be picked up the next morning. When he saw him, he took the baseball bat and he started beating this guy. And he beat him until you couldn't tell what his head was. His head was so smashed up. He crushed this guy's skull. And then he just dropped the bat and walked away. It's not like he ran away, he just walked away. Because, I don't know, it was the urge that he had to beat this guy with a baseball bat. And he did, and he beat him so badly. And he didn't hit anything except his head. He didn't hit him in the chest, he didn't hit him in the legs, didn't break his arms. He just kept hitting him in the head. And he beat him to death by crushing his skull to a pulp. And his defense, when of course, his fingerprints were all over the baseball bat. Well, yeah, he had no defense. Well, his defense was, it wasn't my fault. I was on methamphetamines and I didn't know what I was doing.
Oh, that's a whole different
Yes.
It's been like 10% cut.
So he's saying I've got a mental illness, yeah. And of course, he's in jail forever. They don't
This
have
is
to.
in Montana.
This is in Montana, yeah. Helena, Montana. Stimulants are used to treat narcolepsy, obesity, and ADHD. Stimulants work by affecting 4 neurotransmitters. I already mentioned norepinephrine, which increases your confidence level, your feelings of well-being, and your feelings that you need to get things done. But it also affects your epinephrine level, which increases your energy, serotonin level, which increases your energy, and your dopamine level, which increases your energy. Most of the neurons affected by epinephrine and norepinephrine are located in the area of the midbrain called the locus ceruleus. As you can see, the locus ceruleus is right in the middle of your brain. This portion of the brain networks with many parts of the rest of the brain, and so it feeds a lot of different things. When the body needs an extra jolt of energy, epinephrine and norepinephrine are released to provide energy. When the individual takes uppers, it forces the release of the energy chemicals. These drugs cause the body to react to stress that doesn't exist and makes the individual talkative, hyperactive, and hypervigilant, kind of like Barney Fife on, well, if you've ever watched Mayberry, RFD, or whatever. Anyway, Barney Fife.
Andy Griffith Show.
Yeah, it was a good show.
No, it was the Andy Griffith.
Yeah, Andy. It was the Andy Griffith Show, you're right. Andy Griffith. But anyway, Barney Fife. He was talkative, he was hyperactive, and
Well, he was like that in Three's Company, too.
Yeah, but as he was getting older, he was that guy on Three's Company. The stronger the stimulant, the longer it takes the body to recover. Large quantities over long periods of time deplete the body's energy stores and leaves the body without reserves. And for this reason, of course, these people are skinny as minutes. And the reason is because they're not taking in any food. They're not hungry. They don't think that they need any food. And they have all the energy in the world. And of course, they just keep burning all this stuff off. They'll burn their muscle mass. They'll burn all their fat, certainly, but they'll also burn their muscle mass. Withdrawal from stimulants can create severe depression that can last for days, weeks, or months. And this is one of the reasons why they continue to use. Not because they want the energy, but because they're afraid of the withdrawal symptoms. Withdrawal symptoms are quite severe. We're not talking about, I'm a little bit depressed. We're talking about individuals that are extremely depressed. This is clinical depression. It's bad. Yeah. So they just stay on the stuff. They stay on the meth. People tend to build a fairly rapid tolerance to stimulant, the stimulant, no matter what it is, forcing the individual to consume more and more of the substance. Even coffee will require more and more with increased consumption. Usually we can control this stuff. You've got a cup of coffee, not 3 cups of coffee.
That's just my third.
That's your 3rd cup of coffee today. Okay, I stand corrected.
Well, I'm trying not to take anything for my migraines.
Oh, okay. Well, if that helps, then I say consume the coffee. They have done studies, and now they think that coffee slows down cancers. So people that drink coffee are less likely to develop cancer. My dad was a huge coffee drinker. He had a cup of coffee in his hand all the time. Now the weird thing was that, so everybody's scared to death. My dad goes in for heart surgery, and they're going, oh my God, they're not going to let him have any coffee. And they didn't let him have any coffee. But he was fine because he wasn't really sensitive to caffeine. So he just drank it because he liked the taste of it, despite the fact he drank it by the bucket load, literally by the bucket. There was a pot of coffee. He cooked coffee all the time. He usually used those I don't know, those coffee maker things. Mr. Coffee?
My uncle would drink 3 pots a day.
Oh, jeez. Well, you know.
But he was pretty much done with his life anyway. No, he had AIDS.
A mess.
He had AIDS, so.
Well, you know, die of AIDS anyway. You might as well drink all the coffee you want.
He did, man. He didn't have it. He'd be coming through. bitch.
The reward reinforcement pathway is a natural structure that informs the individual of an activity or substance that supports survival. Your hunger is satiated, you don't have to worry about it. You don't drink. Your thirst is satiated. Your sexual desire is satiated. So you don't need anything. When a strong stimulant is used, it overstimulates the reward reinforcement pathway, and the body doesn't respond to hunger, thirst, or sexual activity. The brain cannot be satisfied. And this is one of the reasons why people who use cocaine as an aphrodisiac, it does work in the beginning, but the more they use, now they can't be satisfied, so they start doing violent sex acts. It gets really dangerous to be around these individuals, especially if you're their boyfriend slash or girlfriend, whatever. It's really dangerous to be around these people because they can't be satiated. They have, they can have sex for hours and it just doesn't work. It's really kind of a tragic situation. As more and more of the stimulant is used, tolerance builds and the rush and the stimulation diminishes. But what does remain is the emotional memory of the effects of the stimulant. This is accomplished by the dopamine stimulation in the reward reinforcement pathway. So they're constantly seeking that first stimulation before the brain started repairing itself, before the brain started reacting to it. The first time they used, of course, all of their neurons were normal, and they overstimulated all these neurons. The ones that didn't die, of course, now in order to protect themselves, they're going to downregulate their receptor sites. So they will never, ever be able to get that first high again. The first time they used it, it was just amazing. And after that, of course, they're using more of the stuff, but they just can't get the same high they got the first time they used it. But they'll try, and they will meth themselves to death. One of the side effects of long-term stimulant usage can be dehydration and malnourishment. The dehydration causes the gums to recede, and because of that, the teeth are very sensitive to this type of stimulation or the dehydration, and because of that, their teeth rot. Their teeth will fall right out of their heads. The hypothalamus regulates thirst and hunger. Stimulants fool this part of the brain to think that the individual is neither hungry or thirsty. This can lead to deficiencies of vitamins and minerals as well as damage to the teeth, of course. Besides the dehydration, which causes the gums to recede, they're also not getting the nutrients that they need to maintain their teeth. And so they have bad teeth, which is always quite attractive. Stimulants, including the weaker ones like nicotine and caffeine, induce vascular spasms and constrict blood flow to the organs and tissues. Heavy smokers will have a pasty complexion due to the restricted blood flow. If you've ever watched somebody that's a chain smoker, their face is kind of purple, which is an attractive color, or gray, to the point of being gray. It's not a really attractive thing. If you look at their hands are white, are pasty and white. They have excess amounts of carbon monoxide in their system, so they're poisoning themselves with the tobacco, actually it's the paper that is causing the carbon monoxide poisoning. When I was in the service, we had to do, if somebody came in and they had passed out, one of the things we had to do was a carbon monoxide test on them to see if they had carbon monoxide poisoning. So what we would have to draw their blood, and there's a certain test that you do. But for a negative control, they used to use me because I didn't smoke. I was a runner, so they'd use me as a negative control. There's no reason for me to have carbon monoxide in my blood. But we had a chain smoker in the lab, and we used him as a positive control because he always had carbon monoxide in his blood, and he would laugh about it. He'd say, I want to give up smoking, but I can't because I have to be the positive control for the carbon monoxide test, which was, he would have smoked anyway. But we used him as a positive control. And of course, if they One time this guy had this little girl had carbon monoxide poisoning, and she had a lower level than our smoker did, but of course, she was being poisoned by the carbon monoxide, and he just had that a higher level in his blood all the time. As stupid as that sounds.
Did they have more stuff in cigarettes back then than they do now? Or
What?
vice versa?
What?
Like in cigarettes back then, did they have more shit?
Oh, you mean, no, there's actually less now, or was less than there is now. It's kind of like marijuana. Back in the 70s, the level of nicotine in the cigarettes was lower, and now it's higher. During the 70s, they really jacked it up a lot. 70s into the 80s, they jacked it up a lot. And then they caught them doing it. And then in the 90s, of course, it went down. So, to some extent. But that's how they get people to continue to smoke. They put more nicotine, stronger tobacco into their cigarettes. Yeah, so it's stronger now than it used to be. Isn't that great?
Cha-ching!
Yeah, exactly. As long as we can make money, who cares? Heavy smokers will have a pasty complexion. This restricted blood flow will slow tissue repair and the healing process. Chronic use of stimulants will weaken blood vessels, increasing the risk of stroke. So any coffee, theoretically, but we have already proven that coffee's not bad for you. It's actually good for you. So that's okay. People that smoke, it's almost like they have diabetes. Their circulation is poor. And since their circulation is poor, it takes them a long time to heal if they have a wound of one kind or another. But at least the stimulant user has increased confidence and stimulated feelings of euphoria. They are talkative. They do tend to be restless, highly irritable. You don't want to be around these people a whole lot. If you're, I don't know if you've ever had a friend or somebody that you knew that was on meth. They're, like you said, they're really irritating people to be around. Because they're so irritable. Everything bothers them. They also don't sleep very much, of course. They
Come up with off the wall freaking stuff, you know, you tell them something, and they're just like, yeah, then.
Yeah, just nutty
Knocking
stuff.
at your freaking window at 3 o'clock, hey man.
Jeez. This is the part that bothers me, the fact that they're paranoid. They think that everybody's after them.
I think it depends on the person, because I've seen people like that on weed, and they're paranoid as fuck.
Oh yeah, they are. People that smoke
I
pot.
think it just depends on the person. I've seen people who freaking drink and they're paranoid, like, hey, shut up. Let's finish the beer, man.
They're paranoid, they tend to be aggressive, and they also can be violent, depending on the individual. Prolonged use of high doses of methamphetamine can lead to a clinical level of paranoia or kick the individual into psychosis. Meth increases the dopamine in the central nervous system. One of the conditions of schizophrenia is an overabundance of dopamine receptor sites. So we are artificially increasing the number of dopamine, the amount of dopamine in your brain, and of course, too many dopamine receptor sites leads to schizophrenia. So what in the world are we doing here? We are making ourselves psychotic. I've told you the story about the young lady that every time she used crystal meth, she had used crystal meth over the years, but now all of a sudden, every time she used it, she had a psychotic episode. And she couldn't use it anymore. And she was kind of upset about that. But when she used meth, she changed her personality changed, and she actually changed her ethnicity, or she thought she did. She thought she was Hispanic. And she started speaking Spanish even though she couldn't speak Spanish. It wasn't real Spanish, it just sounded like Spanish. Yeah, she was having a psychotic episode. Sometimes the meth user will drift into permanent schizophrenia, and I told her that if she ever used again, that she might never come back. Whoever she is right now, she may never be that person again. And when I left, she was still okay, but she had just used like 6 months before that and had had a psychotic episode. She's the one that said that her father had murdered her mother.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they dug up somebody's backyard, some random backyard. It was that bad. And she had to pay for all this. And the way she paid for it, her father had just died and had left her his ranch in Montana. And she had to sell part of the ranch in order to pay for her psychotic methamphetamine rant. As stupid as that is. Nicotine provides almost immediate tolerance. All stimulants in a slower but similar manner develop tolerance relatively rapidly. Dependence is developed with tolerance since the need becomes greater and greater, and so that's one of the reasons why when people start smoking, they start smoking and they can't stop. Nicotine has the strongest dependence level of any drug known to man. Cocaine is synthesized from the coca leaf. Since its introduction in South America with the invasion of the Incas in Peru, it has enjoyed epidemics and lag periods. Really kind of interesting if you look at the history of that area. And actually we have written history from the Incas and the Moche, the people that were in that portion of the Andes Mountains. Cocaine comes from the other side of the mountain. The Inca and the Moche were on this side of the mountain. They were on the Pacific side of the mountain. But of course, the cocaine comes from the Amazon Valley. So it comes from the other side of the Andes Mountains. And it wasn't there until the Inca came. And the Inca, of course, tried to make everybody addicted to it. They brought it over the mountain and everybody wanted it. And so now all of a sudden the Inca are in charge. And they got everybody addicted to the cocaine or to the coca leaf. And that's one of the ways that they were able to control the area with a really small group of individuals. They got everybody addicted. The first epidemic was at the end of the 19th century, cocaine. Cocaine has waxed and waned. Cocaine tends to kill off the people that use it. It's like methamphetamine. So sometimes you'll have this really horrible epidemic of methamphetamines, but the people that are using it tend to kill them or die. They tend to die out. So you'll have this natural period of a peak period, and then you'll have a lag period because so many people have died. And then it'll slowly come back. Cocaine has done the same thing. Cocaine kills people. You can overdose on cocaine. Cocaine, if you take too much of it, of course, you might have heart problems. And it's like a diuretic. It's not a diuretic. It's like a diet pill, an amphetamine. It is an amphetamine. What am I talking about? So people don't eat, they don't sleep, and they get sick. Their teeth fall out, and then they die. The famous author Robert Louis Stevenson wrote the novel Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 6 days while taking cocaine as a treatment for tuberculosis. He was dying of tuberculosis. He wrote it in 6 days. How was he able to do that? Well, he stayed up for 6 days straight and wrote the book. Many have speculated that the two personalities represented in the novel actually represented Stevenson on and off cocaine. Stevenson may have written the novel to explain to friends his change of personality, and if you've ever seen the movies or read the book, it's Mr. Hyde is pretty ugly. Cocaine won't grow just anywhere like marijuana. Cocaine grows in the moderately high slopes of the Andes Mountains. Like I said, it's on the Amazon side where it's really moist. Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, some of the islands in Java, in Indonesia, that's the only place that cocaine will grow. It is very fastidious. It has to be, the environment has to be perfect for it to grow. And of course, those are the areas around the Andes Mountains in the Amazon Valley is really the best place to grow cocaine. Coca leaves don't contain very much alkaloid cocaine. 1 acre of 6 to 8 foot bushes will only produce 1.5 to 2 kilograms. That's between 3 and 4.5 pounds of cocaine. So that's not very much. It takes a lot of plants to make the cocaine. And here we're confiscating, 100 pounds of cocaine, or 2,000. What is it? 200,000 pounds of cocaine have been stopped on the border in the last 10 years, 200,000. All those coca plants, I mean, it's amazing and ridiculous at the same time. So now I'm going to teach you how to make cocaine from coca leaves. Cocaine refinement begins with stage 1, soaking the leaves in alkali and water. Stage 2 of cocaine refinement is where the workers add gasoline, acetone, or kerosene to create a paste. Of course, all of these are highly flammable, gasoline, acetone, and kerosene. And of course, you can see this guy's, well, I guess he's barefoot. This guy's barefoot too. He's mixing it is what he's doing. So one guy's mixing it, the other guy's just walking around. But they're mixing it with gasoline and acetone. You can imagine, I don't know if you've ever spilled gasoline on your hands or on your skin. It burns, it really burns, especially in your hair follicles. We used to have to clean with acetone. Stage 3 involves discarding the waste leaves and adding an acid, usually hydrochloric or sulfuric acid. So this is not a real happy process. First of all, we're mixing it with an alkali, then we're mixing it with an accelerant. It burns. It burns. Then, of course, they mix it in the acid, but we're not done. In stage 4, the cocaine paste is mixed with lime and ammonia. The last stage is separating the cocaine hydrochloride from the paste. Smuggling cocaine into the United States has been a constant cat and mouse game between smugglers and the DEA since the 1970s. The Air Force got involved in, what year was that? They started bringing in the Air Force. One of the reasons is because they were using airplanes to transport. They were transporting using airplanes. So, and they moved AWACS down there. So if you were in the Air Force and you spoke Spanish, then they would, that was one of the jobs you could get. Drug interdiction down in South America, trying to stop these planes from coming in. Of course, the Coast Guard and the Navy are part of this whole process. This is a submarine that they built to smuggle cocaine. As cool as that is. Wait a minute, what year was it? I was working at Tinker Air Force Base, and all of a sudden, I'm teaching classes at Tinker, and all of a sudden half my class is gone. Anybody that spoke Spanish is all of a sudden has gone down to South America. It was kind of weird. AWACS went down there. They had SPs went down there. One of my students was a mechanic. He was a fighter mechanic, and they armed him with shotguns and sent him into the jungle, and they did drug interdiction. Yeah, ugly stuff. Sometimes they'll send special forces down there trying to stop these things. And that's where all these pictures came from. Whoops. That's where all these pictures came from, is drug interdiction. Of course, they can't go in without the locals, the local army or the local federales helping them. Anyway, there you go. During the Reagan administration, a friend of the president's was killed by smugglers to steal his yacht, and since then the military has been used to stop mass shipments coming in by plane and shipped from South America. Before that, we didn't really do anything. But after Reagan got pissed off because his buddy got killed, they sent the military down there, and that's when the Air Force went down there, and the Coast Guard, and the Navy. And so they're of course trying to stop all this trafficking. Today there is only one sure route into the United States, and that is along the porous border with Mexico. Of course, now that the wall's being built, well, who knows what's going to happen there.
There's always a way.
I know there's a way. They're
trying to bring it through Canada too. We're going all the way around.
It's interesting that you say that, because of course the Indian reservations down there they're huge. They're not as big as this reservation, of course, but there's a lot of empty space, and it's relatively flat. So from time to time, they'll land transport planes on the res and unload all their drugs that come down from Canada, and then of course they'll distribute them. They'll drug be driving them all over the place. And there's not that much law enforcement in Montana. There's not even 1 million people living in the whole state of Montana. So there's not a whole lot of law enforcement. So it's really difficult to stop them. But those shipments will go to places like Billings and Great Falls, of course, but also Seattle and Spokane, you know, over by Washington.
Where is Montana?
Where is Montana? It's right up against the Canadian border.
So it's right next to Washington?
Yeah, it's right next door. There's Idaho, which is just a little sliver of Idaho, and then Washington State. So Washington's here, Idaho, which is just a little sliver of it. Montana goes it's got like 300 miles of a Canadian border, and then is North Dakota, and then is Minnesota. So, I know, it's pretty strange. Anyway, they used to fly transport planes into the res, and they'd land, and people would say, you know, I saw a UFO last night. No, you didn't. What you said.
Drug plane.
Well, it's really interesting because, you know, they've got all those missile silos down in that area. It's not right there on the res, it's right off the res. But the Air Force would be, of course, they know everything that's coming in, but they'd have to fly low so that the radar wouldn't hit them, so the radar wouldn't catch them. It got very interesting, the cat and mouse game. Right off the reservation was a bombing range where they would, you know, sometimes the Canadians would come in and use our bombing range, or, you know, they take off from Malmstrom Air Force Base, or Minot Air Force Base, which is over in North Dakota. Anyway, a lot of strange things taking place in that portion of Montana. And yeah, they would bring drugs down from Canada. Colombian, and it's poor. I talk about porous. It's not even, there's not even a fence. You don't even know when you're in Canada and when you're in the United States.
Hey, we're on the land.
What's 300
I don't
miles?
know what country I'm in, but hey.
Yeah, 300 miles long. San Diego's got a real problem with tunnels. Tunnels. San Ysidro, right there.
Yes, San Ysidro goes, you got Chula Vista, National City.
Right.
San Ysidro is the very, very last city before TJ.
Exactly.
Very last city.
And
like, here's the border, San Ysidro, Tijuana.
And Tijuana's right across from San Ysidro.
Right there.
Right there. So what they'll do is they'll dig tunnels underneath the border, and they have these drug tunnels, and sometimes they have.
I've had a buddy of him. He was real connected with Los Zetas, and he said that from what was it, Sinaloa, which is just a little bit past TJ.
Right.
If you go down, like if you're looking at the states,
right,
it'd be like southeast, I think.
Okay.
Maybe. It was kind of by Rosarito, but there was like a 14-mile freaking tunnel, and you would land somewhere like just a little bit.
This isn't a walking tunnel. This is a driving tunnel. This is a tunnel big enough to drive a truck through.
Yeah, they could just bring stuff.
Yeah. It's like a road.
And it's crazy to pick up like money or whatever. They would just meet in San Ysidro.
Yeah.
They jump off and then go their ways.
And we're talking about pallets of bills. Insane stuff. Colombian drug cartels smuggle about 2/3 of their product in this manner. They sneak it across the border. The last third continues to come over by sea. North America consumes 40 to 50% of the world's cocaine. And that's the reason why we need all of these drug tunnels, and we need them to sneak it across the border, because we consume almost half of the world's cocaine. It is estimated that Americans spent $36.1 billion on cocaine in 2004. All of these are estimates, of course, because we have no clue. It's illegal, so we really don't know. Cocaine in the United States averages 84% purity, with prices ranging from $12,000 to $35,000 per kilogram, and that's about 2.2 pounds.
I don't know, someone to do that much pure.
Yeah,
they fuck them up.
Yeah, they cut it. most people couldn't handle it. There are 1,000 grams in a kilogram. The street value of 1 gram of cocaine is $50 to $200 with an average purity of 57%. So yeah, they've cut it. And usually they'll cut it with all kinds of interesting things like talcum powder or powdered sugar. Crack cocaine comes in rocks of 1/10 of a gram to 1/2 a gram and sell for $10 to $20 each rock. Hardcore cocaine users will spend an average of $186 per week on cocaine. Cocaine is actually cheaper than it ever has been before because so much of it is coming into the United States. It's coming in very rapidly. It is estimated that there are probably over 3 million hardcore cocaine users in the United States. This is Billy's, what in the world is his last name? He used to be on television, he used to sell all this stuff, OxyContin.
Was he all jacked up on coke?
He died in his 40s on a cocaine overdose.
Maybe he mistaken the OxyContin for the OxyContin.
I'm thinking he knew what he was doing. When the Spanish first arrived in South America, they found many people in the Andes Mountains chewing coca leaves. Most Incan users actually mixed the juice with lime from ground shell or ash to accelerate the introduction of the alkaloid into the brain. Introduction occurs in 3 to 5 minutes. So you start chewing this stuff, you get it into a nice paste, and you put the ash or the shell in your mouth, and it will speed it into your brain. These guys are, this is the Inca Trail, and these guys are walking the Inca Trail. I was on the Inca Trail. I was right there, as a matter of fact. I didn't get my picture taken.
What is alkaloid?
It's just something that's alkaline. You could use urine. I mean, urine's alkaline, so you could actually use urine. So, you know, piss on your leaves and then chew it. That would work. Works. Taste is the same. The conquistadores encouraged use of coca to increase the productivity of their Quichua workers. Of course, Quichua is the language group of the people, the indigenous people who live in the Andes. These guys are Quichua. Or Quiche, well, I don't know how they say it. In 1859, Albert Newman isolated the active ingredient in coca, in the coca leaves, cocaine hydrochloride. He isolated this substance. It was 200 times more powerful by weight than the coca leaf. The drug was first used as an anesthetic and a medicine to treat depression, tuberculosis, gastric disorders, and asthma. And of course, famously, Freud used it. Thinking, of course, that it would battle depression, and it works. It actually works on all these things. If you use cocaine, of course, your depression goes away, which is kind of exciting. Cocaine wine was popular in France and Italy in the late 1860s. This ushered in the first modern cocaine epidemic, as 2 glasses of wine delivered the same amount of cocaine as a line of coke. So, wow, you could just take a couple of glasses of wine, you were pretty stoked up. It took 15 to 30 minutes for the cocaine to take effect after ingesting in this manner. So you're okay for half an hour, then all of a sudden your eyes get big and you start talking and you can't shut up. By the 1880s, patent medicine and drinks began to appear laced with cocaine, opium, morphine, heroin, cannabis, and alcohol. Since no one really understood addiction or the real power of the supplements in their tonics, many people became addicted, especially women, because of course they were trying to to get things done, and of course woman's work is never done. So they would drink these elixirs, and all of a sudden they're all buzzed out, and they're getting their housework done, but now all of a sudden they're addicted. They need another bottle of this stuff. People began introducing cocaine into their system in new ways. Injecting intravenously introduces the drug into the system in 30 seconds. Snorting cocaine introduces the substance into the blood in 2 to 5 minutes. Snorting more cocaine is counterproductive as the drug is a vasoconstrictor, so once introduced into the nasal passage, it slows the absorption of any new cocaine. And this is a really serious problem with cocaine. We know people that have, who snorted cocaine a lot, and they had to have their nose reconstructed. And this is because the cartilage in your nose is living tissue. It's alive, so it has to be fed by blood. It has to be fed. So since this is a vasoconstrictor, if you snort cocaine, then you're constricting the blood vessels. You're actually starving the cartilage in your nose from any nutrients, including oxygen. So well, if this lasts for longer than 3 to 5 minutes, then all of a sudden you've got dead tissue. You're creating dead tissue in your nose. The more you snort, the more dead tissue you get in your nose. And so what happens is they'll have a deviated septum. A hole will form between the two nostrils. That's a problem. That can potentially be a problem. But they also would just lose the cartilage, and it would just dissolve because it's not being fed. So their noses would slowly become pug because all the cartilage was going away. This happened to Linda Ronstadt, was a big cocaine snorter. She had to have her nose reconstructed twice. And if you look at her over the years, you can tell when her nose is dissolving and when she's had her reconstructive surgery. It happened to her twice. Her nose broke down. So if you look at pictures of her, like in the 1980s, her nose was slowly going away. Of course, she has a kind of a pug nose anyway. It was slowly going away until it was almost not there at all.
Sing in Spanish too?
Yeah, yeah. Well, her mother is from Mexico.
I think my mom was sometimes.
She's really good. I've been a
Brown hair, short.
Yeah, black hair. Yeah, I've been in love with Linda Ronstadt for decades, but not her cocaine addiction. She's got Parkinson's disease now, which is a big surprise. Since she snorted all that cocaine.
That can cause it?
What?
Using yayo can cause Parkinson's?
Oh yeah. Whoops. Oh sure. That's one of the reasons Michael J. Fox has Parkinson's disease. Snorted a lot of cocaine. Yeah. That's the way.
That's not all the case with all Parkinson's.
I'm sorry?
That's not all the case.
Oh no, certainly not. If you develop it at a young age, what's the probability that?
If you're doing your 20s and you're sticking sugar.
Yeah, he was snorting a lot of cocaine. Well, he's Canadian, and Canadians drink a lot. And of course, he came down here, chug-a-lugging a lot. And then when he got down here, he's still drinking a lot. But then they introduced him to, cocaine, because if you're a television star in the 1980s, you snorted a lot of cocaine. And so he snorted a lot of cocaine. His brain was sensitive to this stuff. So sensitive to this stuff that he developed Parkinson's disease. I used to love Michael J. Fox. I thought he was a great actor. But unfortunately, of course, right after Doc Hollywood, he actually had to have surgery before Doc Hollywood so that he could make that movie. But he was already starting to get Parkinson's disease, sadly. Snorting, okay, so you can't snort more cocaine, but they do anyway. If you see, well, I showed you the picture of all those lines. So how much cocaine should you snort? Well, if you snort one line up one nostril, then you can snort a second line up the other nostril. But if you snort a third line, you're just wasting all that cocaine because your nasal passages are already so constricted that it's not going to be able to get into your system anyway. So you're not really helping yourself. As the cocaine wears off, the nasal passages open back up, causing a runny and sniffling nose. And if you've ever been around a cocaine snorter, they're constantly wiping their nose because they've got snot coming out. Hopefully it's snot, because if they have it's a vasoconstrictor, remember, so potentially they could have a hemorrhage, a nasal hemorrhage, and I've seen this before. Usually that's how I came in contact with a cocaine snorter. They came in with a nosebleed that they couldn't stop. So we had to go in there and cauterize the blood vessel that had hemorrhaged because they were snorting cocaine. Oh, God, this is when I was working in a Catholic hospital, which was weird because, you know, it's obvious what happened, but nobody would say anything about it. Because these are, at that time, this is in the 1980s, and those were the rich people in Omaha. This is in Omaha, Nebraska. And these were all the rich people. So nobody's going to turn in the rich people because they donated a lot of money to the church. Anyway, so they'd come in and we'd cauterize their, or the doctor would cauterize their nose. And of course I had to draw clotting factors on them to make sure that they didn't have leukemia or hemophilia or something. Oh God, what a mess. No, it was irritating, okay? And we had the one lady that snorted so much cocaine. She snorted cocaine when she was pregnant. Oh God, the baby came out just a mess. I mean, it was horrible. Baby was born without, one baby was born without a skull. Another baby was born with a heart on the outside of its chest. It's, you know, it's just ugly, ugly stuff.
Can they have the same systems as FAS from using?
From using cocaine, usually they're addicted to cocaine. These kids, none of these kids survived. The one without a skull, I mean, what are you going to do? Yeah, they had to take the baby cesarean, of course. And I was working in the in ICU. I was a mess, and the baby cried. It just cried. But I mean, there's nothing anybody could do with the one with the heart on the outside. There were heart defects besides the fact that the heart was on the outside of the chest cavity. It died. I mean, there was not a whole lot. They could have done heart surgery and put it back inside, but there were so many heart defects that it didn't survive. As a matter of fact. As the cocaine wears off, okay, we've already talked about that. Mucosal and contact absorption, smoking and cocaine-laced cigarettes were introduced in 1914, but the high temperature of the cigarette destroyed most of the psychoactive substance, so it didn't really work, even though this sounds like a really good idea, but it just cooks too hot. The paper makes it too hot, and so it destroys the cocaine, so it didn't work. You have to cook it in a different way, at a lower temperature. Because cocaine is a natural substance, it tends to be metabolized very quickly and its effects dissipate much faster than synthetic stimulants. The half-life of cocaine is 30 to 90 minutes and is detectable in the urine for up to 36 hours after ingestion. So that's a hint and a warning to those of you thinking